Greetings. This is the Grumpy Old Slan, and today we're going to be looking at the September 1925 issue of Weird Tales. The last few covers have really been what we think of as pulp magazine covers, and this one is clearly no exception. There's a few recognizable names on the cover. Clearly, these writers, even though it's still early days, have made their mark. And looking at the page of contents, we see 17 stories, including part one of a new serial. The magazine opens with The Gargoyle by Greye Spina, which is the serial in question and apparently the cover story. I quite enjoyed the last serial by this author. We'll see how this goes. But so far, what we have is a young artist who meets up an occultist of sort who asks him to be his assistant. And while the artist turns the offer down, he is told that he will become the assistant no matter what. And as he goes on to his destination, he gets waylaid and ends up with that occultist at this weird pseudo medieval castle that some rich person has built in the middle of nowhere in Pennsylvania. He finds he's basically stuck there. Of course, there's a young lady that he falls for, and strange going ons, and we'll find out what happens in more detail in the next issue. It's followed by The Terrific Experiment by Hurley von Ruck. And in this one, a man who is condemned to death for murder has been voluntold by the prison system to undergo some sort of experiment in hypnotism. What the experimenters don't know is that he is himself an expert in hypnotism, and he will manage to transfer his personality to that of someone else, thus escaping the death sentence he is under. And this story is relayed by a doctor who witnessed the events. This kind of story is quite old. I mean, we can always think of the case of Mr. Valdemar by Edgar Allan Poe, which I think was more interesting in many ways. I have to admit that the whole using some sort of mystical art to move your personality into another body is still being used today, so can't blame them for using it. And it is followed by The Sultan's Jest by E. Hoffmann Price, another one of his stories set in an exotic Middle East concerning the Sultan who discovers that a man is having an affair with one of his wives from his harem, and he decides to punish them. And the punishment will be that one of them has to choose one of two glasses of wine. One of the glasses is apparently poisoned, and they will both have to drink one from each glass. Whoever survives will know that they do so at the expense of their partner. Now, that said, they will have to drink separately. The Sultan then goes into the room where the man is supposed to drink his cup, and he finds that in order to snatch victory from the Sultan, the man has killed himself with his dagger instead. The Sultan then says, "Oh, you fool, neither cups were poisoned. Both of you were going to live," believing that your partner had died. And then to prove his point, he drinks from the wine. What he does not realize was that the man had a friend in the Sultan's scribe who knew of what was going to happen and who had decided to not force either of the lovers to live with the pain of knowing their partner is dead, and had put poison in the wine. And therefore, a new Sultan will now reign over the kingdom. So I've always enjoyed E. Hoffmann's Price stories. This is another good one which I recommend. And it's followed by The Temple by H.P. Lovecraft. This is allegedly a manuscript that was found somewhere on the coast of Yucatan and is the story of the captain of a German U-boat. As the crew succumbs to strange happenings, the captain maintains his composure for the most part and witnesses strange and otherworldly things happening at the bottom of the ocean. He is also, strangely enough, one of the few Lovecraft characters to not go mad with what he has witnessed, maybe showing that people who are entirely subjugated into an idea, whatever it may be, are more resistant to the horrors that Lovecraft brings about. It was a fine Lovecraft tale, quite enjoyable. Following it is another reprint, The Furnished Room by O. Henry, in which the author does manage to get quite a creepy atmosphere happening throughout the story. In it, a young man rents a furnished room for a week, and he apparently is looking for a young lady who has disappeared. They apparently have some history together. He thinks he has found a hint in the room he happened to rent. However, the landlady, going over the people who have rented the room in the last year, dismisses this notion and thus removing his hope of finding her. The story ends with a conversation the landlady has with an acquaintance of hers, saying how she's managed to rent the room. The acquaintance asks if she has told them about the previous renter, and she says no, because the previous renter, who happened to be the young lady in question, has done away with herself. A very good story, quite enjoyable. Then we have The Midnight Visitor by William Sanford, which is a brief half-page story. And I think the word story is complementing it quite a bit. It's more of a writing exercise than anything else. Following it is Darkness by Charles Hilan Craig, in which a young man who, due to a variety of circumstances, has a huge fear of going blind. And after an encounter with a gypsy woman that doesn't go well, she tells him that he will pay and will go blind. This causes his phobia, his fear of going blind, to increase even more. And to help him out, some friends invite him out to the countryside. One day he is in the cottage alone, will fall asleep, and has set the alarm to wake him up at 7. But when he does, everything is black. Believing he is blind, he will kill himself, and his friends discover his body. And we discover that the clock was not at the correct time. So when he thought it was 7, it was actually the middle of the night, and that's why it was entirely black. I guess an okay story, nothing really supernatural or anything like that, but the young man's phobia shows up in all sorts of things. He drinks a glass of whiskey and then believes, oh my God, what if it was wood alcohol and I'm going to go blind? Any innocuous thing will trigger his phobia. In that sense, the atmosphere is quite well done. Which is, I feel, not the case for the Blackthorn Gallows by E. Speight, in which a man who has been condemned to hang will haunt his comrade, who he blames for some of the things he has done and for being caught. And then the surviving partner who is being haunted will be caught by a lynch mob, and they will do what lynch mobs do. I was not enthralled with this one. It is followed by Itself by Seabury Quinn, and I was quite happy to see Quinn finally start publishing some fiction. This one is about a man who has been told that a comb that belonged to his daughter will predict people's death, and it seems to have done so for his daughter when she was ill. And now he has the flu, and the doctor thinks he's recovering, and he believes he won't because the comb disappeared from the daughter's room and appeared in his room inexplicably. To reassure him, his doctor will say, well, I'll just take it and put it in my safe in my office, and you'll see that it's all nothing. You're going to recover. Don't worry about it. However, the following night, the man will pass away. The doctor will be called, but only arrive in time to conclude that he has passed. Strangely enough, they do find the comb in question in his room. The doctor will take it, bring it to his office, put it on his desk. He'll turn away from it for a minute to open his safe, in which he finds the comb. And then when he turns back towards his desk, the comb that he left there has disappeared. Yeah, one of those supernatural happenings that is quite common in stories of the time. But this one is left a little bit open. There's no attempt at explanation. It's just a narration of the events. I quite enjoyed it. It is followed by The Flying Halfback by Robert S. Carr, in which two young men are wooing the same girl who has not made her decision yet. And as it happens, one of them is a star football player, and the other one is more of a scientist, nerdy type. And a young scientist has discovered a substance which he's called corbine, which is essentially like caverite, the H.G. Wells story, a substance that is repelled by gravity. He's managed to build it into a device that, if it's attached to you, will reduce your weight. And he will offer this device to the quarterback because it will allow him to jump and run faster, higher than anyone else and win the game. What the quarterback doesn't realize is that the scientist has a duplicate of the controller that he can work at a distance. During the game, as the halfback is using the device, he will take over its control and cause him to just float away up into the sky. What probably wasn't intended that way, it feels like a humorous story in some ways, although the fate of one of the protagonists is pretty grim if you think about it. The story does suffer by an overly long explanation of the workings of the device, which is totally not needed and which unfortunately a lot of science fiction of the day suffered from. It is followed by another early piece of science fiction called The Ether Ray by H.L. Maxson. In this one, a writer who is out of inspiration will answer a classified ad promising adventure. He will go to the given address and meet up with this professor who has created what he calls the ether ray, which causes items in its light to disappear. And he suggests that the young man be the first human guinea pig of this ray to find out what happens. He's told that he will reappear, not to worry. They will be able to both benefit from the knowledge of this ray. And on top of the arguments to help convince him, the professor uses mesmerism on the young man. However, he recovers enough to grab an iron poker from the fireplace and smash up the device before it can be activated. Some of the ray escapes from the device and causes the professor to disappear. And then the scene cuts to the young man being asked by one of the staff members of the club he resides in what's happening. He sort of realizes he's still somewhere in the club and using a poker has just smashed a very expensive floor lamp. So one of those, it was all a dream type stories, which is always disappointing. That last little bit was just unneeded and really weakened the story. It is followed by The Masters from Beyond by Edward Podolsky. This concerns a ship that was found entirely empty of crew and passengers. There's a mention of the Marie Celeste at some point. The people investigating the ship find a manuscript in the captain's cabin relating the events, and it seems that they have been all taken by what someone on board calls the Masters from Beyond, who take them one by one. They don't know quite why. The manuscript ends in the middle of a sentence as clearly the captain, who was the last person on board, is also snatched away. This one was quite fun. I quite liked it. The one disappearance that is described is done so in quite a lovely way. They don't just blink out or anything. It was quite surprising and fun. It is followed by The Seventh Ring Cup by H. Thompson Rich. In this story, a young woman who writes stories for Ladies Magazine, but who would like to branch out into more adventure type tales, decides that in order to do so, she needs to experience some things, and she will put an ad in the paper advertising how she will help anyone with a problem. Somebody does answer her ad. It's a young man who has inherited from his father, who was somewhere in the Middle East, a treasure that the father apparently found, but he doesn't know where it is, and the only clue he has is the seventh ring cup of the title, which on it has inscribed a passage from Omar Khayyam's Rubaiyat and some strange numbers like a cipher, except that no one he knows has managed to solve it. And so she asks for a day and for 50% of the treasure. And she does solve the mystery. And then they go to where the treasure is, and after some adventures, manage to recover it. They also find a note from the father saying that apparently anyone who tries to divide up the treasure will fall under some curse. And so, in order to not split the treasure 50-50, the young man will propose to her, giving them both a happy ending. It's a fun little adventure tale. It's interesting that the actual cipher to be resolved is actually included in the story. In fact, if you get to the point where the cipher is, you can try to see if you can solve it yourself. I guess that's part of the appeal. I think it's the kind of thing that slows the narrative down a bit more than it actually helps it. A brief explanation of how it was solved is enough. You don't need to explain all of it. At the end of the story is a short poem, The Death Angel by Frances Hard, which I have done a reading of and will link to. After which we have Jean Beauce by W.J. Stamper, another story which I will mention but not comment on. But after that is The Weir Snake by Frank Belknap Long. This is about an archaeologist who has an encounter with what he is told is the goddess Ishtar. He's told if he's to survive the night in the ruins that he will be staying in, he should have a knife. Although he says he'd rather have his gun, he is convinced to also take the knife. And a young lady who he is involved with will join him, trying to get him to leave. They have an encounter with a strange creature who seems to be half woman, half snake. The creature grabs her. Through tremendous effort, he tries to go and save her. And when he does make it there, thanks to the knife, he manages to do away with the creature and they run away. The next day, where the creature was, they find not a headless snake and a woman's head, which is what they saw, but a headless body and a snake's head. Frank Belknap Long always wrote an entertaining tale. Most of the struggle described isn't so much physical as trying to overcome the powers of the creature and the tremendous effort the man has to take in order to reach it. He is literally crawling, trying to move ahead, though everything tells him it's too far, too hard. He still manages to pull through for the woman he loves. Typical pulp adventure tale, but which means it's quite the page turner. It's followed by The Devil Bed by Gerald Dean. In this one, two friends who are both amateurs of antique furniture, Americana, discover a letter mentioning a devil bed, which apparently is some sort of old type of bed with gargoyles and stuff carved into it. No one has ever seen one. They've read about them, but they don't exist anymore. And he thinks that from the letter he found, he can maybe track one down. And track one down he does after several weeks. He asks his friend to come and join him where he found it for packing it all up. And it turns out that the family who owns it doesn't use it. They've put it in the loft of their barn. And there's a history of members of the family committing murders. They've also made arrangements through connections they have, should the bed prove to be real, for it to be taken by a museum, because it's such a rare and antique piece. But before packing it, the man who discovered it decides he's going to sleep one night in it because it's his only chance to. The figures worry his friend. He feels it's all a bit creepy and he tries to convince his friend not to, but to no avail. During the night, a scream is heard. The friend wakes up, goes down the stairs to find the man who slept in the bed having a knife in his hand and having just killed the dog, turn towards him and attack him. Luckily, the farmer whose house they're staying in was also woken up, will shoot but not kill the friend, which will bring him out of the trance. They will decide that, no, this bed needs to be burnt, and as they do so, they find an inscription on one of the pieces of wood stating that anyone who sleeps in the bed will have blood on his hands and have a lust for murder. Yeah, it was an interesting story. Maybe a little bit longer than it needed to be, but still quite fun. Following it is Ashes of Circumstance by J.U. Giesy. In this one, a sheriff is investigating a double murder. A woman and a man were found both dead, and a man comes in telling the sheriff that he has information on this. And he is going to ask the sheriff to tell his tale the way he feels is best. And he explains that the couple that was found are actually not married. The woman was married, but to another man who it turns out was insanely jealous. And he suspected an affair between the two, setting up a trap, telling them he'll be away. He actually turns back, and when the man shows up, I should mention the man is also a friend of his who often drops by unannounced. And when he sees the man drop by, he bursts into the house thinking he'll catch them in the act. However, he doesn't. They're just in the living room. He then rushes up to her room and finding a pile of cigar ashes believes that is proof that they were shortly before in her room and will kill them both. And then the sheriff asks, yes, okay, that's all very nice, but how do you know all this and where is the guilty party? To which the man who'd come to the police station admits that he is the guilty party and the ashes that he found were of his own cigar. Nothing supernatural, just somebody who let his emotions go to an extreme that they shouldn't have. We then have the Eyrie. I mentioned last time how they were saying how the magazine was better established now. So they spend a bit less time selling the magazine and more on actual letters from the readers, quoting several of them. It is about people expressing their appreciation for one story or another. Nothing remarkable about this one. This has been the Grumpy Old Slan, looking at the September 1925 issue of Weird Tales.